Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome back to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and this episode is a bit of a tribute to a recently departed superstar. Now, I say superstar because if you are of a certain age, and I'm of that age, where Olivia Newton-John was a massive, massive star. So Olivia Newton-John passed away at the age of 73 here in the States, August 8th, so just a day ago from when I'm recording this. And I think I'd mentioned on one of the earliest podcasts that I did, where I was talking about 1978, 1979, and even the very first episode that I did that I talked about the movies that I went and saw. So I had an aunt. Well, I still have an aunt. She's still alive. Occasional listener to the program. Who is a early Gen Xer. And depending on your criteria, she might even be just outside of it. But I've always considered her part of Gen X. So she's 1964. She used to take me to movies. And I am something like 95 to 98% sure that I went and saw Grease in the movie theater in this tiny little theater in Wallingford, Connecticut. But we'll get back to Grease, and we're just going to do a little bit of a retrospective. Because again, if you're of a certain age, Olivia Newton-John was a massive, massive worldwide star, and her accolades are numerous. So she was born in Cambridge in the UK, but then moved to Australia. And she became a star even as a teenager. So her very first gig, sometimes in the 1960s, Olivia Newton-John was, as a teenager, was on an Australian TV show called Sing, 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 which earned her a trip to the UK, her country of birth. And while she was there, she was joined by a singer by the name of Pat Carroll, and they formed the duo Pat and Olivia. Now, I have no idea about Pat and Olivia. First time I was hearing of it when I was doing a little bit of research for the podcast. But again, this is going back to the 1960s, and she was just a kid. So she really was a teen idol. And that wasn't always the case, so think about it. In the 60s, we're talking about being a teen just around the time that the Beatles were just getting out of their teens. So they were probably in their early 20s at this point, but this is how long she's been around. So then, fast forward, 1974, the year of my birth, by the way, Olivia Newton-John represented the UK at something called the Eurovision Song Contest. And she performed a song called Long Live Love, a song from her fourth studio album. So again, she starts in the mid-60s. By 1974, she's on her fourth studio album. And that song reached number 11 in the UK. But she didn't win. She came in fourth behind, get this, ABBA, who won with the song Waterloo. That's just baffling to me. Just absolutely baffling to me. So now, just a few years later, so 1974. So on June 16th of 1978, she was cast opposite John Travolta, who at this time was already a TV star because of his role on Welcome Back, Kotter, as Vinnie Barbarino. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Welcome Back, Kotter was a huge hit. And I just remember being a kid and it still being first run. So Travolta leaves the show. It still goes on for another couple of years after that. And Horshack was like the big star and all that. So how many people know the story of Grease? Now, I would imagine everyone. So just a quick aside, and I've said it on the podcast before. Because of my age, I am a huge fan of Grease 2. Now think about some of the actors who were in it. Like Michelle Pfeiffer, right? She was a crush for so many young men of our age. I loved Grease 2, in part because the story. I'm not saying it's a better movie, not really. The songs, I do love many of the songs, but they're not iconic. They weren't written by the Bee Gees, right? But I really liked the fact that Grease 2 was about staying true to yourself, not becoming someone else. So when Maxwell Caulfield's character becomes someone else, the resolution is, at the end, be yourself. Not so with Grease. So again, I'm like 4 years old. Like I had just turned 4 in June of 1978. And again, pretty certain we went and saw it in the movie theater. So she is cast as Australian Sandy Olsen, who meets Danny Zuko, played by John Travolta, at the beach, and they fall in love. Now, of course, they're both heartbroken because summer's over, and of course you get the number, summer 11, and she has to return home, and they have their last kiss, and oh my gosh, it's all so sad. Teen love. But her parents decide to stay in America. And she's going to the same school as guess who? Danny Zuko. But Danny is a member of the T-Birds. He's not this nice, sweet boy that she met on the beach. No, he's a biker. He's a bad boy. So, what's so interesting is that my view of Sandy was that it was actually unrealistic, the ending and resolution of Grease. Because Olivia Newton-John, to me, for the longest time, was just so wholesome. So again, I'm influenced by the people that are around me, the older young people in my life. So again, like my aunts, my mom was still very young at this point too. And it just seemed completely out of character. Like I didn't buy it when she came out at the end of Grease in the biker outfit and the pink lady's outfit. It was just, it didn't strike a chord with me. So maybe somebody of a certain age would be like, no, that was like this great critical moment, and it was so awesome to see her come out of her shell. But Olivia Newton-John, just a sweetheart, just an absolute sweetheart. So this kind of comes into play a few years later, but even as a little kid, she was wholesome, sweet, Olivia Newton-John, but super famous because of Grease. Now, what's really interesting, I did not know this, is that she was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire, so the OBE. It's one of the lower honors. So obviously, you have your low end, something like this, and the high end is actually knighthood. And then there's like another level above that. It's like Knight Commander or something. So anyway, in 1979, so again, Grease is a worldwide phenomenon in 78. She'd already been around a while, but she gets that OBE in 1979, what they call the New Year's Honors. We're going to come back to that because that comes into play later on in her life. So next up is a movie that, again, I'm pretty sure I saw with my aunt. And of course, it is the critically maligned but absolute cult classic, Xanadu. All right? So Xanadu. Do you remember who's in Xanadu? Michael Beck. Best known for The Warriors. It's also the last performance in a film by Gene Kelly, who, of course, Singing in the Rain, etc. So again, even as a kid, having these older influences, I knew who Gene Kelly was. And it was like a big deal that he was in this weird little movie with Olivia Newton-John and Michael Beck. But the music was by ELO, Cliff Richard, just reminds me of the young ones, and Olivia Newton-John. So she is playing a Greek muse, Kira, who, you're talking about fantasy in a modern setting. So she's one of the muses, and Michael Beck is, Sonny Malone. He's this struggling artist, and he's going to build a roller skating rink. Now, roller skating has come up so often recently for me. Daniel and I talked about it a little bit. You know what? It wasn't on the podcast. He and I were just texting after the show, and I talked about certain songs being played at the roller rink. Now, again, if you're of a certain age, roller skating was a huge place where you had this kind of just fun activity, but it was always melded with music. And I talked about how that's where I heard, Jay Giles and Laura Branigan, Joan Jett. And there's also a song that, going back, I did the InXS episode last week, and there's a song called Original Sin by InXS that I remember playing at the roller rink. Because that's 1983? There's also this little aside. I don't know if you all remember, but there was the Jerry Lewis Telethon, right? The Jerry Lewis Telethon. And that was on every year, and that's for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. But did you know, or do you recall, that there was a skating equivalent? So you were basically signing up for either hours or laps or something like that to support the telethon. So people would sponsor you, you fill out a little paperwork, give you money, and you turn it in, and then, you do laps and laps and laps. And one of the local roller skating places, again, in Wallingford, was a host of one of these. And roller skating was this massive phenomenon. And I remember doing the Jerry Lewis Rollathon, as it was called. So that's why I just think it's hysterical that Xanadu is about a roller rink. There was this movie, too, with Linda Blair from The Exorcist, trying to get away from that horror connotation. And it was some teen roller skating movie. I forget what it was called, but I remember seeing that. So anyway, Xanadu and Grease. Those were her big movie vehicles at the time. It's funny, mentioning Grease and thinking I saw it in the movie theater. I also remember it being such a huge deal when it was played on network television. Now, I don't know if you recall, I'm sure you do, that it was a big deal that when a movie was a big hit, that they would advertise the network broadcast premiere of, pick a movie, Star Wars, Grease, whatever it was, or coming soon to home box office, because HBO got that stuff too, right? So, I remember it being kind of a big deal that they played Grease because, and let's see if y'all remember this, they bleeped out some of the lyrics to Greased Lightning. It says, what is it? We don't take shit and we're getting lots of tit or something like that. I think that's the lyric. That was bleeped. Remember, this is like 1978. Maybe broadcast, it was 1979 by then. But that was like a big deal. They cursed. They swore. Oh my gosh. They're teenagers. They're playing teenagers and they're swearing. And they're talking about naughty things. I remember that just being such a big deal. So then, after Xanadu was kind of a flop as a film, she did have a hit song out of that. So that was that song Magic, right? And Magic was a #1 hit in both the UK and the US. Was it Hard to Believe We Are Magic? Something like that. I remember that being everywhere. Catchy tune. But here she is, putting out a movie, getting a #1 single out of it, right? So she is all media, right? Massive superstar. So remember I said it didn't quite, again, yeah, I'm young. But there was a character mismatch. There was a character mismatch to me for the Nice Sweet Sandy and Naughty Sandy, Pink Lady Sandy. So in 1981, she released a song called Physical. And Physical was from her 11th album. This is a platinum album, and it stayed number 1 for 10 weeks. But here's a line that is a recap. It's amazing. The video of men and women exercising was deemed inappropriate by some for being unapologetically sexual. Yet for many, the video and her outfit became a cultural icon that served to break Newton-John's sweet girl next door type. I totally agree. That's when she was sexy. Not Sandy, but Olivia Newton-John, Physical. And, so we've been watching Stranger Things as a family. And if you all recall, season 3, I think it's season 3, yeah, where they're at the mall. And there's this scene where they're watching what they think is a bad guy. So I'm trying not to give spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it. Because I hate that when I go on a podcast, even if something's a little bit old. Anyways, a couple years old, spoiler alert. But anyway, they think it's a bad guy and they're following him. And he goes in to a aerobics studio. Yeah, an aerobics studio with open doors, glass windows out in front. And it turns out he's the instructor, right? And he gets up in front and there's all these women. And all these women are in their little spandex outfits and their big teased hair and their big earrings. They're going to exercise. They're wearing earrings and headbands and makeup. And my kids go, that's not real, is it? People didn't do it. They went to the mall and they did aerobics? Yes. Yes, they did. They absolutely did. This was a real phenomenon. And think about it. It wasn't just Olivia Newton-John and Physical. I think Victoria Principal had a video. Of course, Jane Fonda had a huge video series with all of her aerobics videos. I mean, this was Richard Simmons around this time. Like, it was the beginning, not the beginning, but the how do I put this? This melding of fitness with media that hadn't been seen regularly since Jack LaLanne. That's why, he's the originator of this whole fitness craze. But now you were melding it with the bright colors and the spandex and kind of the branding, aerobics, jazzercise, like all those kind of things. So this was absolutely this iconic moment for Olivia Newton-John. So I kind of feel like she dropped off the face of the earth because I had completely forgotten until I was reading about it. Two of a Kind, which she reunited with John Travolta. This is 1983. Now, I remember the advertisements for it. I don't think I've ever seen the movie, but it was like a big deal that they were teaming up again for a movie. This just says that a movie centers around Travolta, a poor inventor who attempts to rob a bank, and Newton-John plays the bank teller with whom Travolta eventually falls in love. Of course he does. It says here, the film was not well received. However, once again, the soundtrack was a success, earning Newton-John 3 hit singles and the song Twist of Fate. I remember that song. Oh my gosh. Huh. Well, one of the things I think about all the time. So my daughter recently, probably like 2 weeks ago, she was sitting maybe at the kitchen table or dining room table, whatever. And she's kind of humming and like, wait a minute. Is that Hopelessly Devoted? She goes, yeah. I'm kind of obsessed with that song right now. So here we are, all these years later, right? All these years later, and a song from Grease is still iconic. Now, they haven't seen Grease, the movie, but they know all the songs. But Hopelessly Devoted, that was something that she'd just been listening to, mixed in with her Taylor Swifts and her Drake and all that. That's a mind bender, right? But one of the things that always struck me, even as a little kid, so I've talked about it ad nauseum on the show. I was a singer. I was classically trained at one point for a few years. But it always struck me that the last big number, well, I guess We Go Together is the last big number. So the whole reveal moment, right, for Sandy is You're the One That I Want. So John Travolta is a TV star who just so happens to be a very talented dancer, and it turns out he can sing. But when they're singing You're the One That I Want, when they're harmonizing together, he's the higher voice, right? He's the one singing these high notes, and she's actually, singing the lower. Now, again, this was many years ago where I did any training, so I don't know, tenor, soprano, alto. I'm assuming that she's kind of an alto. He's kind of a tenor and was pushing the upper registers. If I'm wrong about that, go ahead, text me, comment, whatever. But I just remember he's singing the higher harmony, which is just I always remember it. But the two of them certainly became kind of intertwined forever after that. In fact, Travolta wrote on Instagram, "My dearest Olivia, you made all of our lives so much better. Your impact was incredible, and I love you so much. We will see you down the road, and we will all be together again. Yours from the moment I saw you and forever. Your Danny, your John." Very sweet. But they are obviously linked forever. So one of the things that she became known for in the latter part of her life was less about performance and what she was doing as a humanitarian, but coming from a very real place of her own experience and her own pain. So she was first diagnosed with breast cancer in 1992, which returned in 2013 in her shoulder. So again, it's not just always localized, and that's when it gets so dangerous, when it metastasizes and spreads. So even after a mastectomy, it's still possible to come back in other tissue. So she beat it again in 2013, only for it to come back again in 2017 in her spine. But she was a tireless activist for this, and she launched the Olivia Newton-John Foundation Fund, which was a charity that sponsored global research into plant-based medicine for cancer. She also funded the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Wellness and Research Center in Melbourne, a public hospital dedicated to innovative cancer research. And in 2018, she and her husband were seen at the annual Wellness Walk and Research Fund in Melbourne. So I mentioned earlier that she had received the OBE, the Order of the British Empire. But that was for arts and entertainment. But in 2020, just 2 years ago, at that same New Year's honors, she was awarded the Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, the DBE. So that is the female equivalent of knighthood for her services to charity, cancer research, etc. So very powerful. So to think as a very young woman, in her 20s, almost 30 at that point, but, as a young woman, she receives an honor for what she had been achieving up to that point in her life. As a singer, as a performer, as a movie star. But here she was at the age of 70 or so, receiving the highest honor. Well, I guess second highest honor. I guess there's one other level that she could have achieved, but still, she was granted dame status. So I've been purposely avoiding, up until I mentioned this piece of it, not calling her by her official title. But that was because I wanted to get to that point chronologically. But she is Dame Olivia Newton-John. And she certainly earned that respect and that title and that honor. And then in 2000, when the Olympics were in Australia, she was one of the people who had the Olympic flame. And she performed Dare to Dream with another Australian, John Farnham. And she said that the participation in the Sydney Olympics was one of the most exciting honors of her life. So again, if you are of a certain age, and I am of that age, she was a star my whole life. And I can imagine that there are some younger Gen Xers, early millennials, and certainly if it weren't for, things like Spotify and, Apple Music, etc., where you can easily attain music, or parents showing their kids shows and movies and things from their youth. Otherwise, there's no context. So my daughter is singing Hopelessly Devoted. She does not recognize anything other than she loves this song from this famous musical without recognizing or realizing, because how would she, the cultural impact that Olivia Newton-John had for 3 decades easily, at least 2 decades of consistently being in the public eye and worldwide famous. In 73 is far too young. As I get older, the concept of old age continuously moves, like that goalpost moves. So here I am, a couple years shy of 50. And 70, 20 years from now, that seems so young. 90's old, right? And advances in medicine, etc. But then, despite her wealth and fame, this cancer is just such a terrible destroyer of life. So I even think of it in the context that my father-in-law was in his 70s, earlier mid-70s. And it was cancer, and I just, I kind of take some solace in the fact that she put so much of her time and effort into research, and the number of people that she has likely saved and will save because of the work that she did. So to be culturally significant, both as a performer and a philanthropist in a very meaningful realm, this woman is an icon, without a doubt, and deserves all the credit, adulation, everything that she's receiving now. It's well warranted. So I suggest maybe this weekend, maybe tonight, you watch Grease, listen to the soundtrack. Grease 2 as well. Grease 2 is really good. Maybe just for kicks, you throw on Xanadu for some cheesy 80s magic. See what I did there? And just kind of reflect. And maybe, like myself, you were a little kid and you remember the first time you heard her sing. Or you remember the big deal that was physical. and we just fondly remember a superstar, a super duper star, and I can't just stress that enough. For her time, there was no one bigger for a period of time. Absolutely massive. So that is a pretty short episode tonight because I had to take some time to talk about it because, again, she's been a part of my life forever. Absolutely forever. So, how do you reach me? You can reach me at Facebook, Stuck in the Middle Podcast. You can reach me on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at StuckPodX. You could email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. Please leave 5-star reviews, like, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast or share it via your social media channels. I'd really appreciate it. Now, after talking about this for weeks now, I have finally got a system in place that should allow me to actually do some video content of at least mediocre quality to start. So I just received one of the packages in the mail today for some equipment. That's phase 1. And then tomorrow, I have another piece of it coming, and I'm going to be doing some testing this weekend to see how it works. In part, because I would like to start moving some content into the video realm and perhaps bolstering the YouTube channel with additional non-directly podcast related, but certainly related content, adjacent content, if you will. So, thanks for listening, everyone. And Grease is the word. Until next time. Later, slackers.